I'm very pleased to welcome KJ Thomas, a registered social worker with our Women's Mental Health Program at the Royal, for our next conversation at the Royal. She's a dynamo. For the past 15 years, KJ has been working in the community mental health. She's been providing care services to people where they need it the most. As a social worker, she cares deeply about the clients she works with, and she spends time learning who they are, what they need to recover, and how, as a team, we can best assist them. KJ is known for her caring and compassionate approach. She facilitates family groups, supports clients, and she supports their families through personal and community support. In taking the helm of the Women's Mental Health Program, KJ is broadening our community reach by working in partnership with community organizations to provide peer support and psychoeducation to individuals who identify themselves as women. She is bringing a different client experience to the forefront, and she's encouraging us to examine gender and culture in how we provide mental health care. She's a dynamic clinician, and she puts clients at the center of care at the Royal. You often hear clinicians talk about the importance of taking care of our own well being. Well, today you will hear it not only from KJ as a clinician, but also from someone with her own lived experience. KJ will share why it's necessary to care for ourselves, for our own well being, and how it helps to foster recovery. She will share some valuable techniques on how to check in on one's own mental health and how to use empathy to help with that. Thank you for joining us in our self care mental health check and learning more about the benefits of mindfulness, how it looks, and what you can use it for, and how it can help your well being. Among the toolbox that KJ is bringing with us, she'll also describe the value of setting boundaries and how it can support our well being.
Thank you, Joanne. It is lovely to be here, and I am excited to talk to everyone today about raising mental health and reducing stigma. So, to start things off, I'll just go a little bit over the agenda so we have a bit of an idea of what we can expect. And of course, if you're not interested in listening to the whole thing, you'll know what to skip ahead to. So, the first thing we're going to discuss is generalizing mental health, just getting a general understanding of what that means. And next, we're going to talk about how to check in with others and ourselves, doing that with empathy. We're going to discuss tools that we can use when caring for ourselves and when caring for others. We're going to have a look at boundaries, the why and how we need them and how we use them. And then lastly, we're going to look a little bit about what we can do to reduce stigma around mental health. And we'll talk a little bit about resources that are available for us in our community. So to begin, I want to talk about mental health. So what is mental health? Generally put, it's a complex thing, but we can get a grasp on it pretty clearly. Mental health is how we feel. So that includes how we process the emotions that we're having. It's how we think. So how we relate to other people, how we think about ourselves, how we think about the world around us. And it's how we act. So the choices that we make from day to day, the ways our body moves, and the behaviors that we have, that is all part of our mental health. Mental health and mental illness is something that we often hear interchangeably, and I want to help give a clear understanding of what that means. So, mental health is something that we often in social work or in the mental health field, and it has a positive notion around it. It implies that we all have a various spectrum of mental health and poor mental health. Mental health is a term that can be used whether we are in good or poor space with our mental health, as I keep saying it. And the difference, I want to tease out what mental illness is. So, mental illness is different in that it is something that is diagnosable. So, it's a mental state that comes with common factors. So, this is something like schizophrenia or bipolar or depression. It has markers that a doctor can actually assess and be able to identify to be able to give a diagnosis. Poor mental health, on the other hand, is something that we all experience at times. And poor mental health can be something like, I'm feeling a little sad today, or I was pretty angry for a few hours there. These can be indications of just having an off day. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's linked to a mental illness. And I should say that when somebody has a mental illness, it does not mean that they're always in poor mental health. Again, they can have variations within that. So, humans are really complex creatures. We have lots of emotions, and that includes things that we love, like joy and happiness, excitement, but it also includes things like sadness and fear and anger. All of these are normal emotions. We all experience them. We all have different fluctuations of them, and we all process them a little bit differently throughout our lives. So, if you're feeling like you're having angry days or sad days, it's certainly not an indication that anything's wrong. It's just the normal part of being human. But if you are feeling like some of those emotions are getting prolonged or just not feeling comfortable for you, that might be when it's time to talk to somebody about exploring if it could be something more. Signs to look for. So, if we're thinking about connecting with somebody or even checking in with ourselves, we might be wondering, like, well, how do I know? How do I know if somebody is not themselves? And some of them are a little bit more obvious than others, but a few things that we can look for: changes in eating habits. So, are we eating more? Are we eating less? Have we lost our appetite, forcing ourselves to eat? Things like that. Sleeping habits might change, so we might find ourselves waking up multiple times in the night or not being able to fall asleep. Or maybe you're falling asleep, but then waking up and you can't get back to sleep. Or maybe you're up all night and just finding yourself wanting to sleep all day, or excessive sleep, like 18, 19 hours a day. Frequent, unusual thoughts, so things that just, you find yourself having thoughts that are just out of the norm for you, not something that you would expect yourself to think. Or if somebody's saying things that seem a little unusual, a little out of character for them, those are things that can be clues. There are also things like sensory stimulation. So that's tactile, the things you might feel something that isn't actually happening, or a visual hallucination. So seeing something that isn't there. You can also hear things that might not be happening, hearing voices. That's common in schizophrenia. Um, Olfactory, we might be smelling things that aren't there. These are all signs that something could be going on with your mental health. Isolating, so maybe you used to be close to one another or close to other people, but now you find yourself pulling back and not really wanting to be around people, or seeing that in somebody that you care about. Anger outbursts, losing our temper and not really understanding why. Increased or unhealthy substance use. So we have things in our society like alcohol or cannabis, and these are legal substances that we might be using. But if you see someone making a drastic change in that, suddenly using more or using it in ways that is unhealthy, and there's other things that we use too, like something like caffeine, coffee. So if you're finding that someone is, or yourself, you're suddenly needing a lot of coffee to stay awake or to keep you going, there's certainly moments in life where we might have a week of fatigue or so. But again, if that's getting prolonged, something you might want to check in about. Lack of concentration or feeling like you're confused easily, or those that you care about are getting confused. Ruminating thoughts, so that means you're thinking about things over and over. You're just obsessing over things. And that could be like fear or worry, anxiety. There could be unusual or big changes in mood. So some people would call that mood swings, but that can also be, it's not necessarily a swing. It's just suddenly you find that you are feeling really sad all of the time, or you're feeling angry most of the time. And then there's also difficulty relating to people. So if you find yourself just not able to really understand what's happening around you to where you used to have pretty good relationships and kind of have a hold on things, you're just feeling like you don't quite get it anymore, or you're finding that you're seeing that in somebody else, that could be a sign that there might be a reason to check in. Um, Changes in our sex drive, so increase, decrease, that can be a sign. And then, of course, there's suicidal and homicidal thoughts. Those are pretty clear indicators that something is happening inside somebody and it's time to check in and have a conversation. So, when we're checking in with other people, there are some things we can do to really help those conversations. And empathy is a really big piece that I want to talk about. We're going to talk about that in the latter half, but first, let's just start with checking in with other people. How do we go about doing it? So now we know what signs to look for that might indicate that we want to check in, but how do we really know what to say or what to do? There's some tips that I can share with you today that can help you with that. So, the first thing is, when possible, plan ahead. If you can collaborate with the person you care about and give them a bit of a heads up that you're preparing for an important conversation, that can help them to prepare themselves for what you might be needing to say or for what they might want to respond with. We want to avoid any assumptions. So don't go in assuming, if somebody's going through a divorce and you're finding that they are just really down lately, you could easily make the assumption that it's because of a divorce. But we don't want to go in with assumptions. We want to really go in with an open mind and allowing that person to take the conversation wherever they need to. There's something called open ended and closed ended questions. So, closed ended questions require one word answers. Do you like the color red? Yes, no. That would be a closed end question. Open ended questions really allow for curiosity to grow. That allows a person to give the longer answers. So, how are you feeling today? You could say good, but it also can give a little bit more of an explanation there. Or how do you feel about such and such? That can give a little bit more complexity to an answer. And that can be really helpful when you're checking in with someone. You want to give them lots of space to talk and open up. Another thing you can ask, if this is something that you've seen a person go through before, you might want to ask them questions like, what got them through it before? They have strengths that they have pulled on, and you could be looking at what sorts of things that was for them. Wherever possible, give choice. You don't want someone to feel cornered. So, choosing a time that works for them, that they feel more comfortable, or choosing a place that feels comfortable for them to converse. I versus you statements. This is a pretty common one, but just to give a little explanation, when we start a sentence or a comment with you, you've done this, you are not living up to this expectation, you need to change this. Oftentimes, regardless of the reason we're doing it or the intention or the truth in it, it's really hard for the person on the receiving end to hear what you have to say. Oftentimes, it will immediately put defenses up. So the person feels like they need to defend their behavior or justify their behavior. So if you can move into I statements, I feel like this, I wonder about this, I worry about this. This is now a reflection about you and your feelings, and the other person has a little bit more space to take it or leave it and to interpret it in a way that feels comfortable for them. We want to aim to prioritize. So if you're coming to someone and you have a bunch of concerns, that can be a little overwhelming sometimes. So if it's possible and you can stick to one concern at a time, that can be helpful for a person to just have a little space to really think it through. We want to respect boundaries. So if the person is not ready to talk or is not wanting to talk to you at all about a situation, give that a pause. If in a conversation it's getting a little tense and you or the other person need a break, it's good to take that break. You don't want emotions to start to overhype or to overseed what you're trying to say. So it's good to walk away in those moments when you can. But when you are walking away, especially if it's because a conversation's become heated, sometimes we can leave a person feeling a little abandoned. So saying something like, what you're saying is really important to me. I just need to take a step back to think about some of this. Or I feel like I might be getting a little bit off in my emotions. So I'm just going to take a step away. I'm coming back. we'll continue this conversation in a day or two or an hour or two or whatever it is you need. But yeah, giving a little explanation can help avoid some of those feelings of abandonment. There also may be times when the conversation just keeps coming to a head, and that's okay. That happens sometimes. In times like that, you might want to look to another friend or another family member that you both agree on is a neutral person that you can talk to, or you might want to talk to a professional. So, a social worker, your doctor, a nurse. There's lots of mental health lines that you can call and get advice or bounce some ideas off of. And, all of this is done with empathy. That's the really important thing. I had just an example. I had a parent come to me and they were really feeling frustrated because they were working for their child. They were doing everything they could. They were buying them groceries and they were giving them here's a pamphlet on this group, and here's a community event that's happening that I think you would benefit from. And, here's some tools that I got you so that you can do this better at home. And they were thinking, I don't understand. Like, my child, no matter how much I'm giving to them and trying to help them out, they're getting frustrated with me and they're shutting down. They're not letting me in. When I talked to the child, what the way the child felt was, I just feel like a problem. I feel like my parent just sees me as a problem that they constantly have to fix. We really want to avoid that. So when we're talking to someone, make sure that empathy is there in that conversation. We want to make sure that they know that we care about them and that their wellness is why we're there. We are just invested in their wellness. And in order to do that, we want to give them lots of space to open up. So, checking in with ourselves can be another part that we need to do sometimes, and that can be a little bit challenging. We don't always know what we're looking for in ourselves. Sometimes we get so used to our patterns, we don't even see things anymore. So I would advise that, taking a moment, taking some real time. So I said a moment, but maybe it's a lot more than that. Maybe it's an hour where you can go outside for a walk, or you can be quiet in a room and just really start to think things through. So scan your body. Is there anything different happening in your body? Things that you're feeling that you're not used to? Your mind, what have your thoughts been like lately? Are you thinking about things? Are you ruminating about things? Your emotions, are they steady and keel, or are you finding them fluctuating a lot? The relationships, how are the connections with the people around you, especially the people closest to you? You can scan your history. Are you finding that there's parts of your history? Maybe there was some abuse in your childhood, or maybe you had a really hard fallout with a friend, or maybe you were in a car accident. Maybe there's things that were traumatic for you that you didn't quite get to resolve. That can be part of scanning and checking in with ourselves. We can look at our lifestyle. Are we seeing ourselves taking risks that we normally wouldn't have? Is there things that we're doing that's just different than the normal things we would? If you're not sure, you can always talk to a loved one and ask them for their opinions or observations. You can consider online screeners. There's lots of things that we can find on our phones and whatnot. Take it with a grain of salt. You might come up with answers or diagnoses that doesn't mean it's true, but it's a place to start. It might help give you some prompts on what to look for. Journaling or mood trackers is another thing that you can do. So again, something that you can get on your phone, or just a plain old fashioned piece of paper and pen. Being honest with yourself is really important. And again, these things take time. So, it's not something that you're driving to the convenience store and thinking, I'm going to check in with myself. You might need to give yourself a little more time to really examine what's going on. And just like if you're connecting with somebody else, if you feel like it's time to maybe talk to somebody on a professional level, they're a mental health specialist, your doctor can help find that for you, or calling a mental health crisis line can really help sort out and give you some resources and advice. So I said I was going to talk about empathy, and now we're going to move into that. So empathy, I see empathy really as a superpower. It's something that we all have, but we don't all have the same level of. So some of us, empathy comes really natural. You might have heard the word empath. So people that are just naturally inclined to feel what other people are going through, they kind of absorb that emotion and take it on. But I want to explain why empathy is something that we can practice and get better at over time. And I want to explain what it is that empathy does. So If we really simplify our brain, if we break it down into reflexive and reflective, so, and a neurologist is probably cringing because our brain is much more complex than that, but I'm just going to really simplify it and break it into two parts. So, our reflexive part of the brain, if we think of a mountaintop, the reflexive part of the brain is that really top peak part. So, there's not a lot of space up there. That's where we make really quick decisions. That's where we have our freeze, flight, fright mode. So that's where, when we're feeling intimidated, when we're feeling scared, when we're unsure, sometimes we will make really quick decisions. And that is something we all do. It's normal to do. But what we find is when we move into the reflective part of the brain, so again, if we think of that mountain, so reflexive is up here at that tip, and then reflective is further down the mountain. When we get down into that reflective space, there's a lot more to see. There's a lot more space. There's a lot more ways to move. We have, lots of trees around us and paths we can take. And this is where we start to list out our pros and cons. We start to use our better judgment. We start to think things through. What could the consequences be? What could happen? What maybe wouldn't happen? What that does, when we can get ourselves into a reflective place of thinking, that just gives us more opportunity to explore what's comfortable and what's going to work or not work. Sometimes in our reflexive space, we make quick, harsh decisions that we look back and we go, ugh, if I had just, if I had a little more time, I could have thought of something differently. If I had felt a little more comfortable, I probably not the decision I would have made. So what we want to do is we want to allow people to get into the reflective place of their brain rather than reflexive. And the number one thing we can do to get a person from that mountain peak into that more open, spacious spot is empathy. Empathy is what, as we build empathy, that's what allows someone to start to take that path down the mountain into that reflective place. So there's some practical things we can talk about with empathy. There's some don'ts and there's some do's. And I'm going to start with the don'ts because I want to leave you with the positive stuff. That's usually the stuff that sticks in our brain a little more. So the don'ts of empathy, we don't want to use judgment and we don't want to come in with explanations. So no assumptions. We want to avoid minimizing. So we don't want to use things like silver lining. At least you didn't blah, blah, blah. Or it could have been worse if blah, 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 blah. We want to avoid giving opinions or solutions without asking permission first. And if possible, just avoid giving opinions or solutions in that first part of the conversation at all. Empathy is really about building a place of focus for the other person. You want to create safe space where they feel heard and where you're listening. So we want to avoid cutting off or rushing people through their story. You want to avoid statements like, I understand. And I know that can seem strange to avoid something like that, or comparing stories, oh, I went through that too, and here's what happened to me. And the reason the don'ts are tricky is because they're pretty natural for us to want to do. When somebody comes to us and they're in pain, it's very natural to want to fix it. You want to offer whatever you can to help give someone a little comfort. So saying, I understand what you're going through. I went through a similar situation and this is what happened to me. The problem with doing that too soon is not to say that there isn't space for things like that, but the problem with doing it too soon is you've now taken the space away from the person and you're really reflecting it back on you. So now you're inviting invitation for them to give you feedback about yourself. And if the goal is to be there in an empathetic place for somebody else, the number one thing we want to do, and I've already said it, but I'll say it again, we just want to listen. We want to hear what they're saying, and we want to know that they know that we hear what they're saying. So what can we do in those moments? So listening. We can acknowledge and we can repeat. Doesn't mean parroting back. It just means, okay, so this happened to you and now you're feeling scared in those moments. That's frightening. That's just a reflective statement. That's just what I've heard and I'm reflecting back. Okay, so another thing we can do is our body language. Our body language can be really telling in what we're doing and paying attention to the other person's body language. So if they are becoming emotional or if they're tense fist, these can be signs that you can look to and read as well. We want to ask questions and explore. So again, those open-ended questions, we want to explore things as much as possible. So giving them lots of time to really tell their story and to really connect with their emotions. And we want to be vulnerable. When we go into a place with somebody and we're really connecting to those emotions, we're often going to feel some of that sadness or that anger. We're going to feel it with them, and so it can be vulnerable for you as well. And when somebody does open up and they tell us everything that's going on with them, we want to be thankful for that. It's not an easy place to be, and so if we can give lots of space for that person to know that we're thankful that they chose us to talk to, and we're here if they want to talk again in future. So again, some of those, asking opinions or offering solutions, that might come, but in that beginning of opening up, you really want to just focus on listening to them and making sure that they feel heard. So Brene Brown is she's just an expert on empathy. She does a lot of talks on empathy and psychology, and one of the talks she gives is just a little piece on empathy. She had a little video made, and so I'm going to share that with you now. We'll watch it together, and it really just highlights some of what I was talking about.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, you can climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. Yeah. And we do it all the time. Because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So, I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now, I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
All right, so the next thing I want to talk about is tools that we use when we're caring for ourselves and we're caring for others. So we all have, we have the certain tools that we need for around the house or fixing the car. It's no different for our mental health. It's not always physical tools, although sometimes it is. But there are things that we can look to and we can use. So some of the things that are common, we've already talked about a couple of them. There's journaling. groups. If you can connect with people through any kind of official group, that can be helpful. Therapy, that, one-to-one or therapy in groups. Nature, just getting it. We're going to talk a lot about nature in a few moments, but nature has a lot of positive impacts, and research is just showing more and more of what nature can do for us. So if you're able to get out there for a little walk in the woods, that can be helpful. Movement, and I have movement there rather than exercise, because exercise sometimes, it is important, and it's a great thing if we have the habit of doing it. But if we don't, sometimes it can feel a little overwhelming. So just reminding ourselves that just movement can be helpful, just getting up and stretching, or taking that little walk across the house, just getting the blood flowing a little bit. That can be helpful for your health and your mental health. Connection. So we want to make sure that we're focusing on relationships with people. Spirituality is helpful for some, whether that's religion, so that's more of an organized structure, or if it's more of a belief in Mother Nature, or connecting to principles of the universe. Some people can find that really helpful. Animals and pets are a great way to get some cuddles and some comfort, and just some positive space in our life. Medications, sometimes people need medications, and that's okay. Our brain is a complex machine, and sometimes it needs the right tweaks here and there, and medication can do that. Helping others can actually be really helpful for us. It makes us feel good about ourselves. So if we're able to do that, volunteering in positions. Comfort food, the foods that we eat, treating ourselves. Sleep is so imperative to our mental health and taking care of ourselves. Having action plans, self-help tools. That's, again, those things on your phone that might be helping you, mood trackers and whatnot. And there's always professional assistance. So if you feel like you're not able to quite figure things out, sometimes just going to see someone and talk that through can be really helpful. So I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the practices that we see, or that we commonly use, that you might find helpful. There are so much more than I'm going to cover in this presentation, but some that came to mind as I was preparing for this. Motivational interviewing is a really nice one, something you might want to look into. So that is a motivational interviewing, or MI, is really known for really being empathy driven. So it's all about partnership, acceptance, compassion, and evocation. So partnership is really moving in a place with a person, not physically moving into an apartment, but just being in that same kind of mental space with them, wherever that is. So whether they're not really sure if they want to start making any changes, or their action plan and ready to go full on, it's just being with them where they want to be. Accepting, so accepting a person at their own starting line, again, just where they want to start, and moving with them through that. Compassion, so again, that intentional curiosity. It's really about pursuing another person's ideas, recognizing that they are the expert in their own life. They're the one that has lived all of the experiences. They know what works, they know what doesn't. So it's really drawing on their own ideas and passion to help lead that relationship. And evocation, so it's drawing out the ideas, let them figure out what internally motivates them. So I said I was going to talk about nature's guidance. Research it's really cool. Some of the things that they are now finding through research. So I remember one study that was done. I can't think of the name of it, but they hooked up monitors to people, and they had them walk the same amount of distance, at the same speed, same clothing, except one person would be in a natural setting and one person would be in the city, or they would have the same person do the same thing, do two different walks. And they noticed when people were walking in open spaces or in natural spaces, things, just measurable things, were happening. So their mood was improved. They were having improved heart rates, cortisol levels. That's what causes stress in us. That was reducing, blood pressure dropping, more vigor. Just overall, being in nature, it reduces our stress, reduces our anxiety, depression, fatigue. So it really can be a helpful place. The other thing that it does is it really can expand our way of thinking. When we're at home, especially in the last couple of years with the pandemic, we really know the environment around us. So we kind of have these almost thinking of paths in the brain. So we know what to expect when we turn that corner. We know what picture is going to be on the wall, so much so that we don't even really need to look. We just know what's there. When we're in nature, it takes some of that away. So it kind of lights up different parts of the brain in more of a spontaneous way. And that can be really helpful. So it can help create new connections and new neurons firing. So that's a good thing for us. So if you're able to be in new environments, that can be great. Nature's guidance can look like gardening, bird watching, exercising, or movement in natural settings, going outside to play, photography, games, sports, picnicking, botany, walks, hikes. I'm sure you can think of a lot more, but that's some of the common ones that pop in my mind. Another form of therapy that's pretty common is cognitive behavioral therapy, otherwise known as CBT. And CBT looks at our thoughts, our feelings, and our behaviors, and it really sees how the three are connected. So, what I'm thinking is going to have an impact on the things that I do, or what I'm feeling is going to have an impact, or what I'm thinking is going to change the way I feel about something, and what I feel is going to change the actions that I take. So, all of these three things are interconnected, and being aware of them can really help us know which areas we might want to change. So CBT really focuses on connecting with those feelings, the physical sensations that's happening, and what actions we might want to take. It acknowledges that the person is the expert. So same thing in MI, talks about the person knowing their own life, knowing what works and what doesn't, and really drawing on that. It also evaluates and understands different schemas. So the habits that we get into or the patterns that we have. So we start to identify those and recognize where we might want to change or what works well and what we want to keep. SMART goals is something that's used within CBT, and I'll talk a little bit more about that soon. So it also, in CBT, it really strategizes on helpful or challenging thinking or thoughts that we have. So an example of that is I fail a test. So I start to think, oh my gosh, I can't believe I failed this test. I was expecting to pass. I'm definitely going to fail the course. If I, you know what, I'm probably just going to end up dropping out or flunking out. I'm not going to be able to get a job. I'm going to end up homeless. My life is over. So that is all or nothing thinking or catastrophizing a situation. And it's really unhelpful for us to be able to stay in a clear mind and find positive paths forward. We want to try and keep an open mind and explore situations and evidence. So what's really happening? If I failed a test, what does the evidence tell me? Well, actually, I hadn't been sleeping much, and really I could have studied a little more. There's probably some things I could have done differently, or I've been really stressed out, and to be honest, I don't think I was really absorbing all of the material like I could have. Maybe I could talk with my prof and reflect some of that. So it's examining the evidence and exploring what the situations might look like. It's embracing the strengths and the accomplishments. I got accepted into this school for a reason. I'm here for a reason. I have things in mind that I want to do, and I know that my strengths have gotten me this far, and this setback doesn't determine the rest of my life. Catastrophizing, so I've already mentioned that, and keeping in mind feelings are not always indicative of truth. And this is an important one. Our mind is not always our friend. There's another therapy, acceptance behavioral therapy, and it talks about that our mind is not always our friend. Our mind, think about some of the things that you tell yourself. You know that you would likely never tell a friend or a partner those same things. When we look in a mirror in the morning, some of the internal thoughts we have, and it's not always truthful. We can think things very easily, and we can think of worst case scenarios, and it doesn't mean that that's going to happen, or that's even indicative of what the truth of the situation is. There's some famous quotes out there. I don't know them exactly, but talking about, if I could have the time back that I spent worrying about things that never happened. So just being mindful of that, really challenging, again, going back to that evidence. What does the evidence tell us? What does it support? And if we really start to explore that situation, what are some of the positive things we can find around it? So SMART goals is something, an acronym that we often use in social work, especially. So specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and timely. So when you're setting a goal, these are some of the things you want to keep in mind. You want to be specific. The more specific you are, the easier it's going to be for you to be able to follow through with that, because you're going to know what you expect from yourself and the things that you need to do to get there. Measurable. So, how do I know when I've reached my goal? How do I know that I've accomplished something? Achievable. So is it actually something that I'm able to do? So maybe physically, am I able to do it? But also right now in my life, am I able to reach that? So is it realistic? That achievable and realistic. And then lastly, timely. So sometimes if you give yourself a bit of a deadline, that can help you to stay on track, if it rather than just an open-ended, when it happens, it happens. So, a SMART goal might look something like, I am going to really focus on increasing my journaling. So I'm going to be specific about that. I'm going to journal 1 page per day for the next week. So at the end of the week, I'm going to have 7 pages of journaling. So that's measurable. Is it achievable? Do you have the ability to write that much? And do you have the time in the week coming up right now to do that? And then you've given yourself that 7-day marker. So another thing that can be helpful is WRAP. So that stands for Wellness Recovery Action Plan. That is a peer-supported model. And what WRAP does is it helps an individual to recognize early signs of unwellness for themselves. It helps to identify triggers, also the strengths and the coping tools. So going back to that toolbox that we carry, and it helps us create a plan for times of distress. So if we plan ahead and have a bit of a crisis plan in place, identifies people who are helpful in our life. So having those people that we can call and look to for advice, and encompassing self-care after a crisis. So after we've really find ourselves, a little bit broken down and needing some repair, what does that look like? What can we do? How can we practice compassion for ourselves? And so, the Mary Copeland Center is a place that you can look for WRAP resources. They are offered at the Royal sometimes. There's a little bit of a difference right now. A lot of it is virtual, but you can start by certainly Googling that and finding out a little bit more about it. The next thing that I want to talk about is boundaries. So I want to talk about what they are and why we need them. I have the picture of the lighthouse there because boundaries and this picture really go hand in hand. Oftentimes, especially if we are in a place where we're taking care of another person, we really want to be the light for them. So we want them to know that wherever they are in the storm of their life, they can look and know that they can depend on us. That light is there. We are shining it for them, and we are shining it to draw them in, to know that they have a safe place with us. The problem with that is if we don't ignite our own fuel, if we don't give our bodies what we need, that light can easily burn out. And maybe easily is not quite the word, because we are resilient, we are really strong, but it happens often. And when we burn out, it can often feel like, well, it's certainly not what we want to happen. And we might think, what could I have done? What could I have done to better care for myself so this didn't happen? And in the long run, this actually connects back to being there for a person. So it's like when you're on a plane and that oxygen mask drops and they ask us, please put on your own oxygen mask and then help the person next to you. Same idea. If you run out of oxygen yourself, you're not there to help another. So really taking care of yourself and putting boundaries in place are important. So the first thing I want to say about boundaries, and it's something that often gets a little confused, boundaries are not rules for another person. So they're not, the intention of a boundary is not meant to challenge or to control another person's actions. What it is meant to do is to put things in place for yourself that helps you feel safe, that helps you feel comfortable, that helps prolong your own wellness. So I have the little depiction there of some of the things that boundaries does. So it wards burnout, improved emotional health, improved relationships, clear expectations for others, decreased stress, improved self-care capabilities, respect from others and self-respect, promotes autonomy. And I want to just swing back to the one, clear expectations for others. So that can be really helpful when you start to define what your boundaries are and know what is comfortable for you. Other people can more comfortably move within that because they know what they can and cannot do that will have impact on your own mental wellness. So when we're looking at boundaries, again, they're not rules, they're put in place for our own well-being. So while this can stem from a boundary, so sometimes we put a boundary in place and it does result in a rule for another person or something that they can or cannot do. That's not the primary person. It might be a secondary gain, but not the primary purpose. So when we're thinking about what a boundary for us is, we're thinking, what makes me feel safe? What makes me feel comfortable or uncomfortable, and what's needed for me to maintain my wellness. They're unique, so there's no universal boundaries. It's really about what is comfortable, and what is comfortable for one person may not be for another, or vice versa. It's about your limits, your capacity, and your comfort. And the other thing is boundaries can change. So what you're comfortable with today might not be what you're comfortable with a year from now. Or you might find yourself something that made you uncomfortable 6 months ago is something that you've learned more about and you know how to navigate now. So that can change. They're important for all people. So boundaries are not just put in place because they are what you need, but you also need to respect that the person you love or care about, they will have their own boundaries and those are going to look different. So having discussions of what is okay for both of you and knowing what those are so that you can both work and live and breathe in a space that is comfortable for the other and helps create harmony in the home. So when we are exploring what our own boundaries are, we can also explore and ask what another person's boundaries are. That can be part of our reflection. Here's the things that I need for me. And I understand that you probably need things too. And it's important to me that I respect those. So if you can let me know, I want to do my best to work on that as well. The last thing I want to talk about today is stigma. So stigma in mental health can really change how we see mental health, and it's something that's come a long way, especially over the last 10 years, 5 years, even 2 years with the pandemic. But when stigma is present, it really impacts how we see the world, or if we seek out help, or if we seek out connections. So we want to look at how helping ourselves can help others. So the subtle changes that we make in our own life can really be a light for somebody else and an example for somebody else. So what does mental health stigma look like? And I have some examples here. All women are a bit bipolar. They all have big mood swings. You shouldn't have kids because you don't want to pass on your issues. That would be selfish. Everyone has anxiety. Some people are just stronger than you are. Or, if you really wanted that change, you just got to want it bad enough. You just got to know that it's going to happen and believe in it. Therapy and medications are just, they're just scams, things you don't need, or they're crutches, things you don't need. Mental illness is just an excuse to live off of benefits and not contribute to society. So, someone who might be on ODSP is just lazy. Kids and teens can't have mental illness. What do they have to worry about? What could they possibly have that's going on in their life that would cause an illness? These things are just so unhelpful, and I mean, they're full of assumptions, they're full of judgment, and they're just wrong. Mental illness and poor mental health is really connected to things that are happening in our brain that can be measurable within chemical levels, parts of our brain that light up or don't light up. So much of our physical health is connected to our mental health. And the more, the deeper science gets into this, the more we're realizing the research is just showing how much impact our wellness and in our physical realm really plays on our emotional and our minds. So, these mental illnesses, something that can happen at all ages. It can affect all walks of life. It can affect all different types of people. It is not a sign of laziness. If my car is broken in the driveway, it doesn't matter how badly I want that car fixed. if I'm not willing to take steps towards it, if I'm not looking for the right tools and the right things, no matter how bad I want it to be better, it's not going to start itself. So, mental health is like that. We sometimes we need to find those right tools that work for us, and sometimes that's just personal reflection, and sometimes that's up to meeting with a professional. But there's lots of things that we're doing in our lives every day that show our resilience and our strength. So it's really focusing on those. So another thing I want to talk about is mental disorders are not adjectives. So often we use language, and sometimes it's very innocent. We don't mean anything by it, but really starting to be aware and think about our language, what we're saying. So if we're calling something, a situation, crazy, oh my gosh, that was so crazy, that was so cray cray, you have no idea. Really thinking about what that word means, and what you're meaning, because what you're probably meaning is that situation was unlikely, it was surprising or unexpected, out of characteristic. So really thinking about our language and saying what we mean, saying things like, you're oh, you're such a psycho, or you look so anorexic, or oh my gosh, that's my OCD coming out. I stayed up till 1 a.m. because my insomnia is so bad. These are things that are not true measures and not true reflections of what mental illness is, and really not something that you want to be using lightly in language like that. So just being aware of it. There are times that we likely all will stumble, especially when some of these words become woven into our society or into media or the shows we watch, and they really become normalized. But one of the ways we can break stigma is being aware of it and challenging ourselves. So another thing, a person is not their mental illness, and one of the best ways that I can describe it is if somebody had a diagnosis of cancer, we don't say that person is a cancer or that person is cancer. We would say that person has breast cancer, or that person has brain cancer, or that person has cancer. It's the same thing with something like schizophrenia. So we don't say that person is a schizophrenic, or we don't say the person is a schizophrenic. We would say that person has schizophrenia. They live with schizophrenia. So that's the first thing. We want to make sure that the person is not their mental illness. We always want to be person-centered, person first in our language. I lead by example. That's something we hear all the time, and sometimes I think it's just lost all meaning. And if we really just stop for just a few seconds to think about what it means, leading by example. So we are taking things that we are doing in our lives, we are making actions, and we are doing them with the intention of setting an example by leading somebody in what we are already doing. The last thing I wanted to say was being aware of bias and false representation of mental illness. So, we were talking about schizophrenia a little earlier. This is one that's often depicted in movies and shows, and it's often incorrect. So often we have someone who's living with schizophrenia, and there are scenes where they are very violent. That is just not indicative of something like schizophrenia. So that is not something that we often see. Can it happen? Yes. But is it common? No. So pulling into stereotypes like that is not helpful. And it can really paint a picture for people that are living with the illness that is a misrepresentation of what the illness is actually like for them. So we want to just challenge that. And if we're seeing it, if we're watching something like that, we can call things like that out. Another thing is we want to make sure that we're understanding the culture that we're looking at and that we're looking through. So mental illness or mental health, poor mental health, that can look different in cultures. So we want to be mindful of the background of someone else's precipitators, because that can lend in where their bias stems from. And having that knowledge can help eliminate some of the personal attack a person might feel, or it might help equip a person in how to share their experiences and insights respectfully. So really understanding the culture, again, the culture that you're looking at and the culture that you're looking from, because that's going to change the lens in which you're looking. So when you get your eyes done and they click those little lenses that go, and each one helps you to see things a little bit differently. So just being aware of that when you're having those conversations or seeking out those relationships. So becoming a mental health ally, if that's something you have time in your life to do, that's wonderful. If you're able to join something like a group or give yourself learning opportunities, that's a wonderful place to be and to connect with others who have the same interest and passion for advocating. Or if you don't have a lot of time for something like that, it's just being aware and being open to continuing to learn and grow in your understanding. So sometimes that can be enough. Just being open to letting your brain absorb and expand and change some of the thoughts as we get more information. Sometimes our opinions can change, and that's okay. That's part of growth. So if you don't have time to be studying or be doing a lot of group participation and whatnot, just starting there can be a great way to be a mental health ally. So lastly, I wanted to just give a few resources. There are lots of resources out there, and there are some people that you can reach out to, including myself, if you wanted a little bit more information about certain things. If you have a family doctor, you could be chatting with them, or a registered nurse. Again, I've mentioned it a couple times, but if there are mental health things that you're curious about, there are crisis lines that you can call. There are also just mental health information lines that you can call. So connecting with somebody at a organization where you can just have some of those conversations and start to explore what's available in your area. And sometimes you may not even need to go anywhere or connect with anyone. Sometimes it can be getting online. There's a lot of information online. So we really want to make sure that we're taking what we're looking at with a grain of salt, making sure that it is respectful of people and cultures, and respectful of research as well. So we want to make sure that the information that we're pulling in and informing ourselves with is researched and actually has some validity that's backing it. So again, I work at the Royal Ottawa Mental Health Centre. So there's two roles that I have. I'm a group facilitator for the Family Support and Information Group. So that happens almost every Tuesday. We're actually taking a break over the summer, but from September to June, we have lots of programs that happen on the Tuesday, different guest speakers. You're here today, conversations at the Royal, so things like this where you can just tap in. Heading over to the events page on the Royal website, that will give you lots of information of upcoming things. There's also, again, going back to the family information, we have our own web page there, and it will show you all of the different groups that are coming up. I also write something called the Family Voice Bulletins. So these are little summaries of the groups that I facilitate that give you some of the information and the resources that are available. There is the Prompt Clinic. That is something if you are needing some help really quickly, you want to get it promptly, you can talk to your doctor or a nurse practitioner about getting a prescription to go there and talk with a therapist and have a few sessions to help flesh out some of those ideas. I am one of the leads in the Women's Mental Health Program. So if you are a woman and you are looking for more information for your mental health support, please do reach out to me. And then there's community resources. So we talked a little bit about RAP. So the Copeland Center has a lot of RAP information. That's a good place to go. Psychiatric Survivors of Ottawa, PSO, they have a lot of information. Psychiatric can sound maybe heavier than it needs to be. Mental health resources, they have a lot of really good information there, groups that are happening, places to connect. So checking out their website can be a step to take. If you want to learn more about CBT, I have a link there for a YouTube video that can help get you started. But again, there's a lot more. If you want to head over to the library, the Royal Ottawa the Royal Ottawa Mental Health Centre has a library that you're welcome to go and check out. If MI was something that was interesting to you, there's a video there on that as well. So that is it for me. Thank you very much. Merci, Miigwech. I appreciate your time, and I hope that you found this helpful. Take care.